Good morning. I'd like to apologize for three things. The first thing I'd like to apologize for is that my presentation is in English this morning. The second thing I'd like to apologize for is that I trumped Victor's introduction, so I apologize for that. And the third thing I'd like to apologize for is the fact that I'm the last thing standing between you and a networking break. And I understand that, so what I will try to do today is sort of speed through my presentation, make it very, very rapid. And then, to the extent that there are any questions, why don't we handle those at the break? I think we all could use a bit of standing up and a bit of a refreshment. So thank you for letting me speak today. The title of my presentation is The Invisible Hand, which is a metaphor for market forces invented by the great economist Adam Smith, who was quoted 2 presentations ago, so clearly that's a theme that runs through our meetings here today. The invisible hand is operating and living well in the markets. This is a chart showing the Standard & Poor's 500 index of stock values, historical view. And as you can see in the beginning, if you will, from 1960 till about 1980, most of the power sat with corporations and the so-called madmen. They were in charge of telling you what to think, and they did a marvelous job doing it. Over the course of time, personal technologies came into the picture, and with the personal technologies, more voices came into the room. And those voices began to affect market values. And then finally, going forward into the age, if you will, of the internet, market forces really steered markets. And in this graph, you see a historical view of the S&P, so you can see the peaks and valleys when the invisible hand is at work. Here's another view of it, and this view is coming soon, and there it is. Over the course of about 30 years, the control over the market on corporate balance sheets of those same Standard & Poor's 500 companies sat with the tangible assets of the company, real estate, buildings, tangible assets. But over about 30 years, what ended up happening is the invisible hand moved, and it moved over to the intangible assets of the balance sheet. That's intellectual property, brand, reputation. Those assets are very difficult to control and very difficult to manage. And yet those are the market forces and those are the values of the market that need the most control and management, given the relative size of their presence on corporate balance sheets. Here's a look, if you will, economically at several large companies and the values of their balance sheets, which are attributable to tangible assets versus tangible assets. It's billions and billions and billions of dollars, and it's in most industries, not just a few. And in fact, it's in every single country, including Chile. Before I came, I didn't have time, unfortunately, to update this table to include Chile, but this is a view of intangible assets on corporate balance sheets by country. And as you can see, some countries have larger proportions than others. As a result of these changes in market forces, traditional models that are used in economics also changed. This graph shows a traditional supply and demand curve. Traditionally, this is operated for hundreds of years. And it is something that we all sort of interpret to balance markets. What happened was, Apple taught us most recently, and it occupies more industries today, that supply actually is evil. Apple taught us this. They maintain very, very little inventory of their stocks. And yet at the same time, they're driving viral demand for their products. They clearly understand the nature of the change to the stakeholder being in charge. And they're reacting to it extremely well with their business processes. Here's an example of a company that did not react so well, and this is Blockbuster. Blockbuster was a video rental company, retail, that didn't see the change coming that Netflix saw, and in 6 short years lost $6 billion and went bankrupt. It's amazing what can happen when the markets are in charge. When the markets are in charge, they tend to look at new ways of doing things. This is an example of a company called Airbnb. This is a virtual hotel chain that occupies a significant and reserves a significant number of hotel guest room stays on an annual basis, approaching that of the Hilton Hotels Corporation, except that Airbnb has no buildings, no employees, well, some employees, not none, but some, in comparison to Hilton, not very many. There's a video on their site that explains their value proposition, which is essentially stay in someone's house and use their spare bedroom. The stakeholders want that to the tune of 10 million nights booked as of a couple of years ago. They'd rather pay someone to sleep in a spare room than they would having a private room at, let's say, a Hilton hotel. So what are the effects of those changes, those dramatic shifts in the market? And what are the effects of those changes on businesses that are both here today and the clients that we work with today? Well, the first is that the control over the brand has moved away from the executive suite. It's moved away from the executive suite toward the stakeholders that use the brand and that trust the brand. So as that picture fades out and that one comes into view, these are not sort of homogeneous people making decisions, all different kinds of people from all different walks of life. Again, controlling the brands that we once thought we could control on our own. The second thing, the second dynamic, if you will, is that the consumer in a B2B or even in a B2B or consumer setting has generally changed the language that they use. And some companies are behind the times in understanding that language. I'd like to play a short video now. This is an intro reel for a documentary that's coming out or might even possibly be out. And if this works well, the video will play. Thank you, Lucas.
Could this bottle actually be harmful?
Forced labor, dangerous environments.
People trust companies less and less. They do not believe companies. They do not believe CEOs. They do not believe advertisers.
Corporations made a mess, and they covered it up with these slick advertising campaigns. People started seeing the reality behind these images, and they were pissed off.
Companies are becoming more and more transparent, whether they like it or not.
There are 2.5 billion searches conducted on Google every day. There is more video uploaded to YouTube in a month than the major TV networks broadcast in the last 60 years.
Traditional advertising, I think, is finished.
You would think that companies, knowing their products are being reviewed and talked about, would encourage them to make better products. There's still a lot of crap out there, trust me.
Being a great company is the new brand.
The definition of advertising has to evolve. Companies have to shift away from just saying they're great to actually being great.
Image is reality. What you see is what you get.
Rather than spend a lot of money on paid advertising, instead let's take most of that money and invest it into customer experience.
Let's create a platform so that our consumers can bring to life what they want within their passion. The people would hug me. I've never been hugged for any work that I've ever done. I barely get hugged at home.
We all know that the planet is under pressure. One company's not going to change it. It needs to be many companies. We need to start a movement, get more companies on board. Yes, we can have a very meaningful impact on the industry.
The best merchants are the ones who dictate the future, not the ones who are trying to predict the future. To the skeptics, continue to be skeptics. Because I'm going to go change the business. You guys do what you want to do, but I see the future.
That's a bit of the language that consumers now are thinking about. It might be a bit extreme. It is, in fact, a film. But it is indicative of the language that is changing from purely product-driven, quality-driven, into more emotive qualities. What you say, what you do, is more important than what you sell. And that's never more clear than it is today in a world where intangible assets occupy big chunks of the corporate balance sheet in growing percentages. Quality has been replaced by qualities. Similarly, clarity of messaging has been replaced with transparency of purpose. This is an example that is living today, in spite of the fact that it's an old example. This cartoon on the left is from 1993. That's more than 20 years ago. And what was then true is also true now. In fact, many of the tools that we're using today are old tools for a new job. That is yet another dynamic of this new market. The smarter companies, several of them, are changing the way they communicate with their stakeholders. They've transitioned from messages about their products and about their services to messages and communications through their brands, and then finally are enriching conversations about their brands out there in the public arenas. It's going to get more difficult, and the reason it's going to get more difficult is that by the year 2020, there'll be 4 billion people on planet Earth connected to the internet, but there'll be more than 10 times that number of things connected to the internet. And transitioning to that future and understanding those signals makes the researcher, the marketer, and the communications professional, it gives them a very complicated job. It becomes very difficult to have a communication or a conversation with a lamp. So given those changes and the changes that are coming, what are some of the things that we can do, and how can we help guide our customers toward this new future? First is to understand that markets simply want more. This is a very famous humorist, in fact, who said a long time ago that thoughts are things. In fact, that's no more true, it's much more true today than it even was back then. Every thought is now a tweet. Every tweet is now captured in perpetuity. The markets want the ability to converse, and they want to have their thoughts captured as things. The second rule to live by is to understand that operational excellence is just the beginning. If in the businesses you provide profoundly good customer service, and you answer the phone quickly, that's just the beginning. Remember, the new consumer wants to know what's behind the brand that you represent. The third new dynamic and the third rule to live by is to not be afraid. Do not be afraid to engage in ways that you might have thought would be uncomfortable in the past. This is an example of a feminine care product where a consumer, male consumer, not of the product, but a male consumer on the internet complained about the imagery that was used in the advertising. The response from the CEO of the company is incredibly humorous, and I encourage you to look for it on the internet. It's a short movie. I won't play it here today because we're short on time and we have a refreshment break that's coming very shortly. Fourth rather, stop using old tools for a new job. Many of us have hammers, and we constantly look for nails, or we think that everything that is a nail, in fact. Well, it's not. We have to now have new tools, and this innovation showcase is an example of new tools at work to try to get after new market problems in new and different ways. And finally, a last movie to illustrate the importance of listening to your stakeholders. I'll ask Lukash to help us illustrate this. Oops, backwards. It's worth waiting for. And then we're off to our refreshment break.
Sure, you know. And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. You do have a nail in your head.
It's not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail.
See, you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. I'm not sleeping very well at all, and all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
Ow!
Come on, if you would just...
Don't!
Try to see things right.
forward back to work after this wonderful event, please remember that there are ways to listen, and they require new skills. And there are ways to listen so that you can understand the perception of the stakeholder and then translate that into business value by linking it to behavior. Thank you very much. We can now move forward and have our refreshment break. I appreciate your time this morning and enjoy the rest of the exchange. Thank you.